When they asked me to host, and it was a no-brainer, because as someone who works around educational justice, this work means a lot to me. We would not be standing where we are and doing the work we are without the research and the practice and coming from Dr. James Banks and Sherry Banks. And so for this work to continue and for us to continue to develop this work around what it means to have culturally relevant pedagogy, teaching, we have to continue to build upon this great legacy. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dean Mia Twomey.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. All right. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let me start the evening by thanking again Sri and Viren for hosting us tonight. This is a gorgeous night. This is a lovely spot. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sri. Okay, so raise your hands if you're a member of the Cherry or Jim Banks fan club. So am I. So we're here tonight really to have it was supposed to be a fireside chat, but we had too many of you agree to come. So we're having a hillside chat on a gorgeous night. And it's a special evening really to hear from two of the wisest, most lovely people that I know. It's going to be facilitated by Dr. Django Paris, who is the inaugural James A. Cherry A. Banks Endowed Professor. And later tonight, we're going to do some things to change that title just a little bit. But without further ado, I'm just going to turn this over to Django so that we can begin our program tonight.
So I thought, we have just a bit of time to do some thinking and learning with you both. And I know all of us have learned over the years so much from your work and your ongoing work. And I thought maybe if I can start with you, Jim, by kind of thinking a little bit about, this storied 50-year career at the University of Washington, 50 years. One of the first Black faculty member tenured, in the College of Education, one of the first Black faculty tenured at the University of Washington, a foundational figure in the field of multicultural education, founder of the Center for Multicultural Education, the editor of, that exceptional book series, the Multicultural Education series, which last count had some 80 titles, many of which, so many of us have learned from, and maybe 4 or 5 of which came out just this year, or the last couple of years, which really speaks to the continued contributions that you both can make. And so I'm thinking about, of course, many of us know that you were a teacher in Chicago, and really in those early years, really rightly focused on Black education, social studies, and then went to Michigan State University. We were just talking about the Spartan pen that you got there from them, giving some, distinguished remarks a few weeks back. But you had that, that focus at that time. And I'm wondering what about the late 60s and early 70s created the conditions really for the development of multicultural education, for its thriving. And if there are any memories or gatherings or people that you could kind of talk about those early years and, what led you to being kind of foundational in that founding of the field at that particular time.
Yeah, thanks for the really important question. I grew up in the South, as you know, in a structurally racist society. And of course, that's what drove me to the quest for equity.
That's right.
But I want to clarify, and by the way, there's an interesting story. When the university published a story, said I had been here for 50 years, I didn't have the nerve to tell them it was 49 years. Because the 50 years sounded so good.
I mean,
I thought that was really
let's round up. Let's round up.
Why not? But I wanted to explain that I didn't start out in multicultural education.
That's right.
I really started out in Black studies.
Yep.
Because I grew up in the deep South in Arkansas, Delta, where I saw where racism to me was black and white. And it stayed that way until an incident I will describe shortly. So my first work was in Black study and then into Black education. My first book was called March Towards Freedom, A History of Black Americans. My next book was called Teaching the Black Experience, Methods and Materials. And my daughters asked me, Dad, how did you write 2 books being a graduate student? I said, because I had to. Because my fellowship was only 3 years, so I had to get out. But anyway, so it was Black studies, what I started in, what I built. And it was only after Wilson Riles appointed, who was the first Black elected official in the state of California, he appointed me in 1971 to a task force to study the depiction of ethnic groups in textbooks. It was only then that I met Jack Ford, an American Indian, Lowell Calhoun, an Asian American, Eleanor Blumenberg, a Jewish American, and Carlos Cortez, a Mexican American. It was only when I was on that task force that these people taught me that racism wasn't just black-white, but it was a deeply structural phenomenon. And to make I have to, won't talk too long because Cherry has to jump in, but I learned that over 55 years of marriage, because I tend to talk too much, as most professors do. But when the National Council for the Social Studies asked me to edit their 43rd yearbook in 1973, I brought all of these people I had met on the task force into a book called Teaching Ethnic Studies, Concept of Strategies, that was published in 1973. And that was the first inkling of anything that would lead to multicultural education. So that was, I was taught by these colleagues to broaden my perspective. So it went from Black studies, ethnic studies, multi-ethnic education, and then to multicultural education.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Jim. And we've talked before about Wilson Riles. It turns out that my oldest friend in the world is Wilson Riles' grandson, Ishmael Riles. And Phil Riles and Susie Van Bezoyen, Ishmael's parents, continue to be dear family friends. I saw Ishmael this summer, but we've talked about that. Was it called the California Commission? Or something. It was
the task force on ethnic studies textbooks.
Right.
Something like
that.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important for us to think about, our own experiences, our own groundings, and what brings us to our commitments, and then what it means to build with others and to learn alongside others. And so I really value that. And I think it's an important memory for us to kind of hang on to as we think about what multicultural education is, and the continued work in educational justice. So Cherry, if you would think with us a little bit about being, one of the founding faculty members, or on the founding faculty of UW Bothell. And I was recently looking up some history on Bothell, which, as many of us know, has become such an important place from the beginning, and has continued to be such an important place for educational justice and equity, particularly educational studies there, but beyond that. And I was looking at the history and found this photograph that's on the History of UW Bothell website of you all as the founding faculty. It was really an exceptional photograph to look at. This might have been 79 or 78, something like that. And, over your years as a faculty member there, received the Distinguished Teaching Award, the Distinguished Professor Award. I'm wondering if you could share some, if it seems useful, about what those early days at that campus were like, or that founding, whether you had a sense of what that place would become and became very quickly, for so many thousands of students. And I think so, very few of us have the opportunity to found really anything, but to be part of creating an institution or a campus. Is very unique in so many ways. And I'm wondering if there is anything you can share about what you all were up to, what you dreamed about, and then whether you knew that this was a possibility for the place that it became.
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, I love talking about the early days at the Bothell campus. We were a small faculty,
Mm-hmm.
literally 3 faculty members in the education program, myself, Pat Phelan, and Jane Van Galen. The 3 of us literally created the education program. And then along with us, there was nursing faculty, 3 faculty in nursing,
Amazing.
and then probably under 10 in what was then called liberal studies. It's
Right.
now interdisciplinary arts and sciences. And we literally, the entire faculty of the campus could literally sit around a conference table. And that's what we did very frequently. We'd sit around the table, we'd talk about issues, we would be able to kind of explore what we wanted to do, investigate, and then implement, because we didn't have any barriers.
Right.
We could do whatever we wanted to do, and that was very
No administrators?
no well,
Oh,
we had
man.
some administrators.
No,
They were part of the team, working right alongside of us.
Of course.
But as you can imagine, building an institution from the ground up was a very exciting, but a very intense kind of
Massive
experience. We not only had to create the programs that we were teaching in, we had to write all of the curriculum for the courses that we taught that first year. And for several years after that, I was writing at least 8 courses a year. And that,
My goodness.
I didn't teach 8,
Right.
but we were creating the courses for the program.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And the other faculty were doing essentially the same thing. We would sometimes kind of joke as we were sitting around that conference table that we were building the plane as we were flying it,
That's right.
because it was so really intense. We were able to just really take off with ideas that were a part of the conversation, the professional conversation around the country. We could grab those ideas.
It's really
and-
moved them.
Absolutely, and do it very quickly. And that was an exciting aspect. But not only did we have to, focus on our programs and the curriculum, we also had to essentially build the infrastructure for the campus because it didn't exist.
Right.
So we had to create committees, policies, all of that. We created something called the General Faculty Organization, which essentially was our faculty senate.
Mm-hmm.
And we would, and I had the privilege of chairing it early on, which is kind of typical in that we were creating committees, and if we created a committee,
You had to serve
somebody
on it.
had to serve on it, somebody had to chair it. And so that was a very typical kind of thing.
Right.
But it was exciting,
Wow.
and we were very happy to do the work and very involved in it. One of the things that was very interesting is that we were hired in August, met our first group of students in September. And normally you would have a year,
Right.
at least a year, to develop the courses, develop the program, and to develop policies and so forth. We had several weeks.
My goodness.
And when we met our students in September, we were thrilled because they were just ready. The students in the education program lived near the campus. They were people who had baccalaureate degrees
Right.
and were interested in teaching, but some were interested in policy and various other areas. We were a graduate program, so they could do a lot of different things in education. And, we would talk about issues, name authors, identify research. They'd run to the library, find those resources, and the next week we'd find them in our office ready to discuss it.
Oh, goodness.
So it was,
Yeah.
really exciting for us and exciting for them too. And, when I think about what we were doing in those days, I think about what has happened now. And the Bothell campus is just a wonderful institution. It is a highlight for our community. It's a place where people who would not have been able to go to the University of Washington and get a University of Washington degree are now able to attend.
Yeah.
We have a faculty there that is just outstanding. Our dean, our current dean of the School of Educational Studies is here, Wayne Au. And our former dean, Brad Portin, is over here. 2 faculty members from Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, Michael and Diane, are here as well. So there you are. We've had people who were not only the founding faculty members, but individuals who along the way helped pour into
That's right.
the campus and make it what it is today. And we have faculty now who are nationally known. They are involved in the professional conversations within their disciplines, getting multi-million-dollar grants for their research, involved in doing very interesting and creative teaching in schools, where they're going into schools, working with students and helping the students to see that, kind of everyday flow of what goes on in the school.
Yeah.
And then working with the teachers to help them to see what some of the most up-to-date research is saying about the subjects that they're teaching. And so it's a very exciting combination.
Well, and just it strikes me hearing from you both, and thank you for telling us, sharing about those early days. Those of us who are teachers, who have been educators, who will always be educators, hearing, two things: hearing about how much you had to create when you need to create a new class, one class from the ground up, it can really be something.
Exactly.
But creating an entire curriculum, right, in short time, but also hearing how hungry the students were, is really, really something to sort of hear about. And I'm struck by what you both have already shared, something that I know we all know in many ways, but how much you built, both of you, building fields, building institutions, there was no graduate program in multicultural education. And you think about the extraordinary number of people who came through that program and have continued to do so much great work. And so thinking about very, very specifically what you contributed here in Seattle, what you built here in Seattle, but the ways that it has carried, I think, can really not be overstated. And so, just huge thanks, I think, for that, for these contributions. And I'm thinking about, so when I arrived, you, as I was already sharing, Jim and Cherry offered Ray and I, so many gifts and so much welcome. And, this is what, some things about Seattle. This is some things about the university. Another gift that I was given was a copy of the second edition of the Handbook for Research on Multicultural Education. Now, anybody who knows that book knows that it's 50 chapters long, about 1,000 pages, and it's by far the largest book that I have. It's like the complete works of Shakespeare, seriously. And it's this book. So it's a tome. I would have brought it, but it's more of like a, stay in the library or stay in the office sort of book. But that book was a monumental contribution, edited by you both, put together by you both. And I'm thinking of, choosing all of those authors, choosing the sort of, what would become such a monumental contribution. And I'm wondering, when you think about, that project specifically, because I think it holds so much, and maybe more broadly, the project of multicultural education. Are there one or two sort of lessons that you think about, either from that project or from this field more broadly, that you're carrying with you in these times, and that you think would be useful for us to think about? These are dire times, of course, locally and globally. There are also times full of so much, work for justice and work for liberation in education and beyond. And I'm wondering if, when you think back, if there are particular lessons that you think really resonate with today and that we should carry with us. Jim, you want to offer anything?
Yeah, I like to move back a little. You know how politicians do. They give you the answers they want to rather than questions you ask. So what I'd like to do before answering your question,
he's never going to answer the question.
The reason before I answer your question, I want to say why we developed the handbook.
Perfect.
And that the reason was to legitimize the field.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's carried my work for the 50 years of trying to legitimize multicultural education.
Right.
And that is continuing. It's an incomplete journey. But let me speak to why to be legitimized. When I was up for one of my promotions, which I got, by the way, one of my senior professors, as you know, this is all anonymous, he said that he's a bright young man. I just wish he'd study something important.
Oh, yes.
I'll never forget that. 50 years later, I still remember that.
Right.
That statement. And I thought, the study of diversity of Black folks, folks of color, it's not legitimate.
Right.
So how do you legitimize the field? One way you legitimize it, I looked at math had a handbook, language arts had a handbook, science had a handbook of research. One of the ways you do it is by publishing a handbook of research.
Right.
That can be used in seminars, can be used by graduate students. And that quest for legitimacy continues. It continued with when Teachers College Press asked me if I wanted to edit a series of books. I said, yes. Because that's another way to legitimize the field. And as you mentioned, that series now has 80 books and they're still coming.
Yeah.
When Sage asked me, did I want to edit an encyclopedia of diversity in education? That was a 3 years of project, 4 volumes. I said yes for the same reason. And finally, and I'm going to stop after this example, when I was inducted into the American Academy in 2021, a few months later, they asked me if I wanted to edit an issue of Daedalus, their quarterly journal. And even though I was so-called retired, and I failed retirement really, I said yes because the quest for the legitimacy of the field, this was the way to legitimize diversity, not only among educators, but among people in medicine, social work, engineering. Daedalus goes to all of these fields.
Yeah.
So that issue is coming out in November. And I hope it's my last big project. And I hope from that, we'll have a real retirement. Remember, though, that when we retired in January 2019, COVID set in.
That's right.
Jerry?
Okay. Well, Django, I would say one of the things that I would take from it is to stay the course. And I think that Jim has really articulated some very important components of staying the course and the rationale for doing that. When we published the handbook in 1995, the first edition,
That's right.
the field was in a very nascent stage. There were still people who didn't fully understand what was involved in it. The research that was associated with was spread out. There was really solid, high quality research going on, but it was spread out and people weren't thinking of it in an integrated kind of way. And so that's what the first handbook did. And it pulled all of that together. And that was to some extent based on some previous work that Jim did. He conceptualizes these ideas and then runs for it. We are members of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, and every year they have an annual meeting. And in those days, it was very difficult to get papers presented. You had to write your proposals, then actually submit the paper, have it reviewed, and ultimately get it accepted. For several years in a row, Jim pulled together a group of scholars from different universities around the country, as well as his graduate students, and presented papers at AERA. Those papers were then pulled into some of aspects of the handbook, but then also some aspects of the series, the Teachers College series. And so those were the kind of foundational things. By the time we got to the second edition of the handbook, the field really had solidified.
Right.
And people who were not necessarily aware of what multicultural education was were talking about it. They were thinking about how they could integrate it into their work, not only in education, but in fields very broadly defined. And even in companies, in the world of business and politics and so forth. It was a term that was being used in a very positive kind of way. So I think that, staying the course is what I would say is a very important.
Yes,
thing.
please.
And I want to
Jim.
share
Yeah.
just a small story.
Absolutely.
Early in the morning, we have to leave home at 5 o'clock because I'm going to the induction of the American Academy of Arts and Science. And one of the reasons I'm going, one of my students, Tyrone Howard, is being inducted.
Mm-hmm.
So that is another sign for me that we are making legitimacy.
No, it's really so important for us to think about, what is the work in front of us in order to offer a path also for the people who are coming. And so it's one of the things that I've learned from both of you. It's one of the things that I try to, aspire to in my own work. If I'm going to take on a book project, if I'm going to, you're thinking, how does this open up space? How does this join work that may have been going on for a long time, but maybe open it up in another place? And I think about my own graduate students, my own doctoral students, and the beautiful work they're doing, which may not have a space if you all and if others didn't hold and open that space for them to do something that I haven't imagined even, right? And I'm sure as you talk about Tyrone, or as we think about folks that we've been in community with who have gone on to continue to contribute so many things, in a sense, we were, fighting for legitimacy, and in a sense, opening up space and holding space for some things that we may have not even dreamed of, and yet we continue to need so much. As you're sharing this, what that might mean for all of us in our own, professional and personal realms to think about taking things on because they need to be taken on in order to hold space, to create a map, to create a path. That oftentimes is in opposition to many of the things that are happening and that have happened historically. I'm wondering if you have any last words for us on something that's inspiring you today.
Well, I think that we must remain optimistic in these very troubled times, and that we must have faith if we're going to make a difference. Mary McLeod Bethune, the eminent educator who was the founder of Bethune-Cookman University, said, and I'm going to end with these words. She said, faith is the first factor in a life devoted to service. Without faith, nothing is possible. And with it, nothing is impossible. Mary McLeod Bethune.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim and Cherry, for sharing this wisdom with us. Thank you again for hosting this wonderful gathering, and to you all for coming. If we can just give Jim and Cherry one more thanks for this extraordinary wisdom tonight, but these decades of wisdom and the decades to come. So thank you so much.
Your friends, your fans, your former students, your colleagues adore you. And we ask each of them to offer a little story, a memory that they have shared with the two of you. And so this is a book that captures those memories. And we hope that you will enjoy reading it at your leisure, just to see your impact, the incredible impact that you both have had for so many people. Now, a few years ago, your many friends from around the world started to gather momentum around other ways that we could honor you and your legacy. And so the idea kind of took root that we wanted to elevate the James A. Cherry A. Banks Endowed Professor to an endowed chair. It took a few years and about 200 people, including the Ramallah Family Foundation, who kind of got us across the finish line by offering a matching grant. But we did it in December. We crossed that finish line and we were able to elevate the professorship to a chair. And so tonight, it's my great pleasure to get this box And actually, I love the idea. I'm happy to, but I actually love the idea of Jim and Cherry being the ones to bestow
Oh my
the
goodness, that
medal
would be amazing.
onto Django, who will be the inaugural holder of the James A. Cherry A. Banks Endowed Chair. It's bigger.
It's bigger than mine.
It's named in your honor.
It's beautiful.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
Wear it well and wear it long.
Oh,
Can somebody get a picture of us?
I think they are.
I think they're taking some right now. So that concludes our program for the rest of for tonight. So really now it's about mingling. It's about coming up, hugging our honored guests, and just enjoying each other's company. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.